Thanks for having me and inviting me here. So today I'm going to go over a little bit of my past projects so you guys have a sense of what I've done, and then talk about Antarctica. How many people here are science folks? Is that most of you? Yeah? Do I have any art people here? Yay! Oh, that's good, that's good. I just kind of want to know who I'm talking to. Also, I apologize for the brightness. It's going to be hard to see some of my images because they're often filmed in dark, so we'll just see what we can see. So in my current body of work, I research and base my projects on a range of natural phenomena, including mild to severe atmospheric and oceanic conditions, including storms and icebergs and glaciers, rising sea levels, warming oceans, which you guys probably know because you're science folks, but also the warming oceans are making our hurricanes and blizzards worse. I'll talk about that a little later. So I'm fascinated by the power of these natural elements in relationship to human fragility, but also our culpability and their growing strength in relationship to the Anthropocene and climate change. So even though every one of my projects and installations has its own specific emphasis, I try to approach things from a more metaphoric or poetic position, and my goal is to create experiential and contemplative spaces for viewers. So this first piece is from 2009. It's called Spiraling Water. I actually filmed a tall glacial waterfall in Iceland, and I filmed it vertically, so then when I'm projecting it, it's going horizontally around the form. That goes from about 6 feet tall up to 8 feet tall. The inner part of the spiral is 6 feet wide, and the outer is 10. The audio is directed into the center of the spiral, so when you're in there, there's a natural auditory shift. I'm really interested in making these spaces for people to navigate and transforming natural elements, typical visual properties, scale, or positioning. So here I was thinking about whirlpools, or also melons, which are those vertical waterfalls inside of glaciers. And this one, because of the changing form, at every angle it looks a little bit different. So after this piece, I was thinking more about ways I could envelop the viewer with video. So I came up with this one. Again, I'll show you a video clip in a second, but I wanted to show you the still so you have a sense of what you're looking at. So it's called Dark Swell. And it's 16 feet wide in the front and 9 feet tall, and then it goes down to 5 feet tall in the back, so it has that forced perspective, and it's 11 feet deep, so you can go in it. And it's a stainless steel armature with rear projection fabric with no seams, so when you're inside of it, you don't cause shadows, and you don't see any seams to interrupt your view, because I really just want to try to create an experience for a person. You're just going to have to pretend. So I also made this 16-layer audio track for it. It's really hard to see. I filmed its actual ocean waves where I heighten the color and the contrast. I really don't know if you can see that. For this one, I was really wanting to push the psychological aspects of this and thinking about tsunamis or undertows. And again, this idea of digitally reframing the natural phenomena. I really like distorting the imagery around the shapes, and the physics of light bend the imagery. It's on the website. Go watch it later. Really interesting. Some people wanted to get out there quick. They're like, oh, I feel really uncomfortable, and other people felt like it was womb-like and just wanted to hang out in there. So just different people had just different personal responses based on their own experiences. The other ones will be brighter. So this is a piece that I made for Art on the Marquee down at the Convention Center. It's a public art piece. So for this, I actually filmed real electrical streams down at the Van de Graaff generator and Tesla coils at the Science Museum, then took out all the background and then layered it. And I could also program the base light so it would look like the lightning is affecting that. So here I was thinking about lightning rods, or the lightning being trapped in the marquee or generated within it. And so this was, and lightning storms. I've done 5 of these different public art projects. For this one, It's called Snow Studies. I filmed 3 different snowstorms at night in 2013, all of different speeds. This one was blizzard strength, or actually, so 75 miles an hour. So sometimes it'll look like ultrasounds or sonograms. And then the other storm that I put a little clip on here was from a much milder storm, so it just kind of moves in really lightly. So I actually just filmed this out of my apartment. It's just like the street light on the street, but I just filmed it, so it was just the white snow and the dark contrast, so there'd be no contact, so you would just look at the snow. And what I like is, we're watching snow, but it's actually the visual representations of the wind patterns, if you think about it. So I like thinking about it as making the invisible visible and being able to actually watch what the wind is doing. So thinking about storms, actually a lot of this work came from thinking about Hurricane Katrina. I used to live in New Orleans and I had a lot of friends and family down there, but I moved before the hurricane hit. And it was one of these things where I was totally fine. But so many people in general, but also of my friends and family, had just their lives turned upside down. And I was just thinking about this and it really hit me hard. But I was thinking about it more, it's storm's just being a storm. It's doing what it does. It's what it's supposed to do. That's what it does naturally. But it's a problem, when it hits us, right? If the hurricane goes out to sea, it's fine, right? No one cares. So I also started thinking about how and where we build our cities. In New Orleans specifically, the natural terrain would take hurricane waters and just flush them back out. But we've paved over everything, right? So it can't do that. And then of course, all the other buildings and wind stuff. And here, I think about on the coast, people build their houses right there and then the storms knock them over and they're surprised. So I think it's just part of all that. And then also, again, as you all probably know, I've been thinking a lot about the ocean warming in relationship to the storm strength and how we're kind of creating this own sort of cycle of destruction. Because now the research shows that 1 degree Fahrenheit raise in ocean temperature increases a storm's wind speed from about to 15 to 20 miles per hour, which is enough to push it into the next severity bracket, which just makes things worse. So I don't know, I think about this stuff. So for me, I just started to try to understand the actual wind patterns and cloud formations. I just started kind of drawing them and just kind of seeing how the different patterns, came and emerged and dispersed. And from this, I got an idea to make a hurricane kinetic sculpture. So it'd be a hurricane that moves in the wind. Get it? Makes sense, right? So I was going to have an exhibit in 2014, and the most recent hurricane that had affected the East Coast was Sandy. So I decided to do it on Sandy because that would, what most people could probably relate to over here. So I just did again, a simplified drawing, a computer drawing, tracing the rough wind patterns, and then simplified it. And then I had this cut out from a 60 by 90 piece of polycarbonate. And then, oh good, another one, it's gonna be hard to see. And actually, what's my volume? Do I have volume control on here? So this is, it's spinning the spinning diameter is 10 feet, and the largest piece is 7 feet by 4 feet. The projection is of the Atlantic Ocean that I filmed off of the North Carolina coast, also an area affected a lot by hurricanes. So here I wanted to reference the interconnectivity of the clouds and the ocean and flooding. For this piece too, I really was thinking about simplifying the complex wind and cloud formations to these flattened shapes to create a highly aestheticized version of the hurricane that simultaneously is a separation from, yet a recognition of its actual power. And this one could move by fans, or it was in a small gallery, so sometimes I let people pay attention. So after that piece, I don't know, scientists and other artists, when you're fascinated by something, you kind of keep digging in at different angles and just kind of seeing, just wanting to learn all about it. So I was thinking more, that was the flattened ones, and that's the wind patterns, but I was trying to think about the height of hurricanes, which are just amazing. An eye wall can be, 7.5 or 10 miles tall. Does anyone live or commute 10 miles in from here? Or what's 10 miles from here? Anyone have a, where? Woburn. Okay. So, oh my God. So imagine from here to Woburn, but then vertical. So like, those are big, right? And so, but again, I can't make a full hurricane, so I'm thinking about how can I simplify this? How can I kind of represent this in a simplified form? So I decided just to make a simplified eye and a couple rain bands, and again, I'll show you in a clip in a second. So the eye here is a 20-foot, has a 20-foot top diameter down to a 10-foot diameter at the bottom, and it's about 10 feet high. So it's in about like a 1 mile to 1 foot scale. And here the footage is, again, water that I've put digital effects on to look more like clouds. And again, it's the rear projection fabric, so it can be seen from both sides and people could enter it. So again, so here, this person would probably be about 8 miles high. You know, she's really tall. So, you know, obviously, like, again, it's like that scale. I can't do it. Like, we'd be a speck. Or about 5 miles tall, right? She's not 8 feet tall, right? She's only, let's go back. She's only 5 miles tall, okay. So here you can see a little bit of the rain bands. Again, I shouldn't apologize for the sun. I really like the sun, but yeah, it's hard to see. So the outer rain band here, the big one, is about 18 feet wide. The smaller one is 9 feet wide, and they're both about 8.5 feet tall. And then, again, I made an audio track. And then here, the water that I've affected to make it look more like clouds goes around the pieces. Because even though I have a lot of footage of actual clouds, they didn't activate the form. And it's about activating the form to feel like it versus actually be, you know, it. So I wanted to try to get that three-dimensionality of those big clouds. Also for this, each of the video tracks in each piece range from 17 to 27 minutes, so there would always be a slightly different combination. Whenever somebody came in, it would never be exactly the same, so I wanted to embrace that idea of randomness and not being fully in control. And for me, this kind of installation is, yes, it's just video installation, and here again, we're totally fine, but then thinking about that bigger scale and, you know, what's actually out there. In 2017, Swiss Next Boston, which is the Swiss Arts and Technology Consulate, was having a dome down at Hub Week. And there's going to be a dome with like video projections. And I was like, a dome for video projections? An immersive structure I don't have to build? I want to be part of this dome. So I prepared a quick proposal and sent it in. And because it was not that much time for a turnaround, I decided to do a variation of the Eye of the Storm piece, because it makes sense, a hurricane that comes down around you. So I created this file, which is what's called a dome master file, and is what you would send to a planetarium. It's a planetarium file. But I love here how, again, so I had to, you know, make this its own one, but it kind of, to me, it totally looks like those towers of clouds kind of coming down. This I actually started, I liked it so much, I've actually shown it separately as its own piece, projected in a dark gallery, like 6 feet wide, so you can kind of feel like you could dive into it. But here, and again, it's just a little, I'm just gonna show you a smidge of this documentation so you have a sense of scale. So here the dome was 22 feet high, and then 22 feet high, and the base diameter was 44 feet. So it was really big. And again, the audio track. For this version of it, I only made it 10 minutes because it was like a screening kind of scenario. People would come in, experience one, and then go experience another. You can kind of see the people down in there. Whereas the other ones are just continuous. They just never end, right? So like you can just like go in at any point and they just keep going. All right, let's switching gears. So this is a piece I made for Union College. And they invited me on a site visit, and I decided to pick the bottom of this staircase for the architecture I wanted to project on, because it just seemed like a really interesting piece of architecture that would be totally ignored. So I went to a nature preserve near the school, and I filmed locally their glacial waterfalls. Oh, actually, this was a happy moment. I was thinking about people walking underneath the waterfall. I hadn't really thought about people walking on top of it, so it wasn't until I was installing and I saw that I was like, oh, that's cool. So that was one of those happy installation moments. So anyways, it was in the Plotters Kill Reservation near Union College, so I filmed this waterfall, which was a glacial waterfall, and I wanted to merge the architecture and relink the building back to its natural surroundings. So we're in these buildings all the time, and we kind of forget that there's stuff like right over there, right? So I just wanted to reconnect these things. And I called it Slippery Slope. I then fell down the stairs, but and that was actually up for 11 months, which is pretty great. Another public art piece I've done was I was an artist resident at the city of Boston, and I worked with the Department of Neighborhood Development, and one of their goals is to help them enliven different neighborhoods and small businesses. So I worked with them to find a location that would have a lot of the traffic at night. So this is on the side of the Strand here in Dorchester on Columbus Avenue, so it's really like this big intersection right there. And so I researched the history of the area of Upham's Corner. So for 200 years before Dorchester was annexed to Boston, it was in its vicinity, it was farmland. So before that, for thousands of years, and part of my observation was the Volcanic, the Kinetic, and the Yukon tribes lived there, cultivated the lands, and actually were really water navigators. And then of course 600 years ago, before that, we have all the ice age, and then the waterfall, ice people, raising those things, and then in the wild grasses, actually in Millennium Park, which used to be an old dump, and now they've made into a park, so I kind of thought that made sense of reconnecting, like re-greening the city. So for this piece, I filmed everything looking up, because I knew that's how people would be looking. You can't see it. You guys are on my website. Actually, you could all just bring up my website. But one of my goals for this was just to have a quiet little moment in the city. Just like a little bit of green, a little bit of surprise, maybe somewhere you go by every day, and so this was on every night for about a month. The program's going on Sunset, and then around 11. Actually, it was great. A woman that had her house behind this, I was told that she started turning her chair to watch that at night and some other things. So this is cool. Another big building projection I did was for the Cleveland Museum of Art. This one I called Our Freezing and Melting World, and it progresses from intense snowstorms to glacial ice and small icebergs to ice melt waterfalls, and then abstracted deep sea waters. So this ice is stuff I filmed in Iceland. And this was actually for their centennial celebration, because this is on the facade of their 1916 building. And again, this idea of just relinking our architecture back to the larger landscape and thinking about these buildings that are built to shield us, and when that works and when it doesn't. So this was a snowstorm that I added the lightning to, kind of, combining different things. How to make a blizzard worse? Let's make it a thunderstorm, a lightning storm. So this is a hour-long piece that I was commissioned to make for downtown. It's at 100 Federal Street. It cycles through with other things. It's still on at random times. So this is just a meditative video that progresses through water in various forms, from fog to rain on forward. But it's also just a good example of the way I film, which is on location and in a very observational manner, just watching the light and movement of the particular element. It was actually this one, you can see it, that gave me the idea for this, calling it film haiku. Didn't it just feel like haiku? Little droplets. Also, oftentimes when I'm filming, I'm just places, I was on a river in Borneo, and now we're in Antarctica. But I just film, and sometimes some of my footage is just too subtle for the installations, things would be missed. So this was great to have this. So that's Antarctica there. So I called it Four Corners of the Earth because it's North America, Southeast Asia, Iceland, and Antarctica is where all the footage is from. So speaking of Antarctica, I'm not sure exactly how it works now, but So I traveled to Antarctica on a SMFA Tufts Artist Traveling Fellowship. So alumni who graduate through some variation of the SMFA program, you guys can ask about it, I don't know. After an alumni, you can apply to travel to locations to film. I probably applied like 6 or 7 years in a row. You just keep trying. And then I got one, so it does work out. So people sometimes ask how I got there. So I flew from, well, here to JFK to Buenos Aires, down to the bottom of Argentina, to Tierra del Fuego, and then I got on a boat across the Drake Passage to the Antarctic Peninsula. Did I mention I get motion sick? Yeah, it's a problem. I was about to get on the boat. I was like, what am I thinking? But I survived, and that's all that matters, right? So before going, I read and collected many accounts from 19th century explorers trying to reach and survey Antarctica. What's interesting is that, for a long time, no one even knew it existed, and they just called it Terra Australis Incognita, or the unknown land of the South. And actually, even the Romans just theorized about it, not even based on any kind of visual research, but they're like, well, if there's a continental land in the north, it must be balanced in the south. But nobody knew. And then for a long time, captains and sailors would see icebergs coming from somewhere, so they're like, there must be land. But it wasn't actually until 1820 that they actually found, and verified that the land existed. But I just love all the old maps and how they're just wrong. But it's just, no. Oh yeah, and the sea monsters and things like that. No, I just love it. But also these accounts piqued my sociological interest in humankind's desire to map the unknown and the apparent need to conquer the wild and claim and extort natural resources like they're made for us, and the relationship of fear and great peril to it all, like taking your wooden boats to Antarctica. Yeah, it didn't always work out so great. But yeah. But also to me, the connection between the explorers and colonialists to animal depletion and extinction and environmental deterioration are all very linked in my mind, right? People go some places, they use up stuff, they mess it up, and they leave, or they stay. But I'm also lured in by the beauty and the romanticism of these old paintings. Isn't this just gorgeous? But this is actually just a depiction of a commercial whaling trip from Scotland down to Antarctica, which a lot of the use of Antarctica was the Industrial Revolution, and they heard there's a whole bunch of fat seals and whales down there, so they're like, let's go down there and get them for the oil. So a lot of the sort of knowledge of Antarctica that grew was because people going for oil and whaling. So this is a photo that was in my exhibit at the Museum of Fine Arts that is just a collection or just some piles of just the old whalebone remnants. It's over 100 years, and there's just this basically garbage piles of whale bones. And in some ways it's fascinating, they're really porous, and I took all these detailed photos, but also it's strange. One of the nice things, and I don't know if any of you guys can spot it, is one of the marine biologists who is one of the expedition leaders told me that on the right-hand side, those vertebrae are from 3 or 4 different types of whales, and she's obviously some person put it like that. So I'm glad that I just didn't think that a whale swam up and died, but I also like that she could just tell by the vertebrae so. So this was my boat, not nearly as pretty as theirs, but so I actually went down on a retired NOAA boat that's been retrofitted for passengers. The left-hand picture I took after climbing up a mountain, and then the little black, down there you can see our little black zodiacs that we travel around for the small pieces of ice. I decided to throw in a few pictures for scale that I don't usually include in my artwork just because it's just so impossible to talk about scale. But there's some little people, a giant mountain. Also, I don't know, is this a lookout ladder? And how much more are you gonna see? I don't really think it's gonna be that much, I don't know. There's a wee little person in yellow. This is an Argentinian research base on the left. It's just huge. It was amazing. I was scared to go, but then I never wanted to leave. And then I don't know if my boat looked big or not before, but it's pretty small there next to the giant cliff. So the first piece that I actually made with my material I filmed in Antarctica is called Rising Tide. This is just a couple little clips from a 10-minute section. So this piece, Rising Tide, has 3 sections, each are 10 minutes, and here I take digital, so my photos of Antarctica, and then I digitally layer the Antarctic Sound above it, and so over the course of 10 minutes, the water slowly rises above Antarctica's icy mountains. I'm thinking about it as like creating an accelerated visual metaphor for scientific predictions, and hopefully, I'm totally over-exaggerating, right? Don't we hope that? But I love this moment where the water turns the mountains into little islands, and then I actually let it cover it. So actually, you know what? We're just gonna take a moment, and we can just watch it for a moment here. There they're going. Now they're gone. And so in each section, it goes slowly. So I actually made this for a projection on City Hall, also part of Hub Week in 2017. And again, I wanted to relink our city with the larger pictures, like what does it mean to have Antarctic waters rising above Boston City Hall? So just kind of relinking our city. Boston's been doing a lot of research. I don't know if you guys have looked at the Climate Ready Boston studies, but they're looking at which areas might be affected by sea level rise or storm surges. Like you can click on different areas and you can click on different years. Since so much of Boston's all infill, a lot of it's just really, especially Eastie, where I have my studio, is in trouble. This is actually the 3rd section, so each of the sections have less snowpack than the one before it. And just to kind of, again, be a visual metaphor for that decretion of the snowpacks. This is another example where I really like the abstraction. So here the water just kind of going on the edges of City Hall. So this was a 30-minute piece total, so 10 minutes for each section with it slowly rising. So when working with my photographs, and starting to think, how am I going to even try to talk about Antarctica with photographs? And also, there's already so many that exist. And I'm not really, a documentary photographer. That's, not really what I do. So I was thinking, like, how do I help people see things in a different way? So when working with my photos, I came up with this idea of making what I call faux panoramas, where on first glance, you're like, oh, yeah, that's a panorama. But if you look closer, I sort of have a laser pointer. If you look closer, this mountain just suddenly stops. And this doesn't really connect. That's actually snowpack, not sky. And then these actually repeat. So I'm trying to have people think about this idea of fragmented view and the limits of photo and video, meaning in a photograph, you have what's in front of the camera, but really there's so much more everywhere else. And instead of trying to have a photograph seem like actual documentation in reality, I want to show you that I'm giving you a representation. This isn't reality, right? And so there's so much more I can't show you. But you only get to know that if you're paying attention and looking close. Otherwise, you just walk by. These are another couple of faux panoramas. The mountain on the left is actually the same as on the right, and you can see they don't match. And same here with the close-up view, that's sky, that's snow. So I'm really playing with that line, that fine line of observation. This is another triptych, faux panorama, things repeat. The other thing for me that I felt like I could bring forward are just my own observations, the things that I just really loved. And for me, those were the details and those close observations. And I loved like the texture and the shapes of all the ice and that really deep blue color that comes from the snow being compressed and compacted in the glaciers for so long. As far as the icebergs, photographed a lot of icebergs. I mean, this is the main reason I went down. I wanted to film the icebergs. So for me, the icebergs have kind of become the literal and metaphoric representation of Antarctica's shrinking landscape. And for me, and one of the reasons I love going and working on location is just what I learned from observation. And just from being there, I started learning like which, the ones that look like still snow, like are the ones that are the recent snowpack have probably more recently broken off, whereas the ones that are all like icy and textural, like in the middle, probably were underwater and been worn away and now have flipped. So by putting it in a grid, again, if a viewer spends enough time with it, maybe they'll have their own amount of learning through observation. So I'm just trying to share that way of working. This is a video portion of it. I called it In the Wake of Icebergs. It's a 2-channel piece, meaning 2 videos at the same time. Each side is actually 25 minutes long. And unlike Eye of the Storm, which I let it be random, this I very finely chose which ones were going to go next to which. I wanted to both merge but interrupt the seascape. I want to try to subvert expectations, like maybe like you want the horizon to match but it won't, or you think an iceberg will go through but it doesn't, except sometimes it does. So basically I try to, once you think you've figured it out, I try to switch it up. And it's, another thing I was thinking about here is also referencing back to the seafaring exploration and trying to map something that's always changing. And I don't know if back then they understood about, sea ice and stuff, or if they thought that would be land, and how do you map something that's always changing or whatnot. This video also has portions that are close up too, but I just picked these wide ones. Let me keep going. Sometimes people ask how close I was to icebergs. Pretty darn close. Again, it's really hard to show scale, but like they're right there. These were like a series of like 3 or 4 giant tabular pieces that were just going by forever. It's like city blocks like intertwined and going. It was beautiful. Another thing for me that was surprising was all of the jagged volcanic landscape of Antarctica. I don't know, people often think of Antarctica and you think of like flat white because people are thinking the big ice shelves, but the peninsula is all volcanic and it's super jagged, and I was just loving it. Again, this is another faux panorama where it's actually repeating. But here, I'm also starting to think, and I haven't quite exactly made work about it yet, but I'm trying to think about how it might tie in with the polar amplification, meaning like the larger change in temperature near the poles, and the ice albedo effect, which again, most of you science people probably know, but it's when the melting ice uncovers darker land or ocean, and then that darker area absorbs more sunlight, which causes more heating, and it has this feedback cycle. Things I'm thinking about. So speaking of volcanoes, this is on Deception Island, which is off Antarctica proper. It's in the South Shetland Islands. And this is from a subglacial eruption. So literally a volcano under a glacier that went off. Apparently this was a thin glacier of only it's like 328 feet thick. So I like that that's thin. And so this image is a glacier mixed with volcanic sediment. But I just loved how it kind of looked like a charcoal drawing and just these patterns. I have so many pictures of this. Or like mascara, like someone's cried. I just found it really beautiful, but this mix of this like dark volcanic with the snow. And basically, if you're trying to imagine a volcano and a glacier, it basically just becomes a giant flood and goes out. So there's actually 138 volcanoes in Antarctica, and so this kind of fascinates me, like the hottest element on the Earth and one of the coldest. And this dichotomy is very intriguing. There's often, obviously the active volcanoes like Mount Erebus and stuff, but just in 2017, they found 91 subglacial volcanoes, and they're still trying to find out if they're active, but they have different, but the cones are still there, so they think that they might, or they're figuring it out. But just this idea of what it could mean with all these volcanoes under the ice. Here, these glaciers are about 2 miles thick of ice, which is really big. But they're even talking about even if they go off, it wouldn't be the whole glacier would go. It would melt the bottom, but then that would make little rivers. Then that lubricates and will make the glaciers move out faster and melt more, so not good. I kind of feel like Michael Bay might make a movie about this or something, right? Volcanoes exploding all of Antarctica. Anyways, okay. Again, just while there, again, I just became fascinated with the little things that I saw, the different rocks and whatnot. So the two upper left are actually penguin nests with their little rocks and their little abstract expressionist guano. That's why I thought that was funny. And then 2 whale bones and footprints, and then the fossils. So the fossil and the mossy sections are on islands to the north of Antarctica. So if they start getting moss down there, it's not a good sign. Oops, I forgot to tell you. Dead animal warning. I don't know if anyone cares. The first one's not so bad. The second one's a little bit gruesome, but that's your warning. Okay. So also, there's just a lot of dead animals. I was kind of joking about making like an Antarctica death series, because it's nature, right? It's not a park. People aren't picking up things and cleaning away. If something dies, it just stays there. So you're like walking around and there's like all these dead penguins. So this one it's not the same penguin over time. I was only in Antarctica for 2 weeks, but it's just like me photographing ones at different stages of decay, just thinking about the natural cycle of life and going from the animal just to being like mud. Okay, next one's a little gruesome. So the top right one is a baby penguin that's been eviscerated by a predatory bird, because it's like, oh, fat, fluffy little penguin, nice snack. And in the bottom left-hand side, it's like a severed penguin foot. But like, look at those black nails and those little pink feet. Like, who knew? I didn't know. Maybe you guys do, but yeah, and a penguin skeleton and all these things. Again, I just sort of found it interesting, just all the little things. Oh, but look, they're alive. Yay, everything's fine. So I actually have a ton of penguin footage, which I'll probably never really use in my art, but this is what you get from the artist talks. You get to see stuff that no one else really see. They're so fun. Baby penguins, see, they're all okay, no eggs. I don't know how much I'm at. I was going to jump to the end. This is here, I'll let this go. They're going to do the switch over, the parent switch. Okay, let me just see if I can jump to the end here. If it'll let me. Oh, nope. Okay, well, I was going to show you a cute thing, but never mind. Okay, so, oops. So just kind of coming to the present, this year I had an exhibit at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. I called it Fragments of Antarctica. It was there for 5 months, which was great. So I had a number of pieces, the photos, video, sculptures, I'll tell you about in a second, and then this projection, which I called Edge of the Current Antarctic Sound. So I wanted to merge the quickly paced Antarctic waters with the architecture of the MFA. So this is a 65-foot long curved balcony, and the whole area is designed by I.M. Pei. And in some ways it creates a watery surface and perimeter for the exhibit, but I was really thinking about creating a sea level water line 1 story high within the museum, and kind of what that would mean. And again, talking about representation, like, right, if the ocean was now 1 story high in the museum, that would be problematic. And letting people be above it or under it, or on the stairs there's a platform and it would be going around them. For the sculptures, I made them referencing the top and bottom portions of icebergs, and unlike some people, like Professor Berkman, if he's here, I have not had the pleasure of scuba diving under the ice. That would be amazing. So I just have to imagine things. So I took photographs that I took of the snowpack icebergs and the ones that seemed icier to pair them together. And then I created these aluminum kinetic sculptures of icebergs for the space. So the 2 long ones are 7.5 feet wide, and the tall one is 9 feet tall. And I designed them to turn outside the edges of the banister. So from below, you would see them and all around. And I called it below churning ice because I didn't want people just to look at them, but I wanted people to think about themselves underneath that, and maybe have that be a little uncomfortable. These metal sculptures turning above you, or the idea of being underneath the icebergs. So to sum up, in my art practice, I have some multi-layered goals. So I would like viewers to think about the actual element or grow or rekindle an appreciation for it, to consider our historic and present relationships to natural environments and how we're affecting them negatively or possibly positively. And then also I'd like people to think about our relationships to built and digital environments, as in the architecture that always surrounds us and that's built to protect us from the environment, but obviously, due to development and building trends, sometimes it's the opposite. And then by digital environments, I mean the digital mediation of our world. So how we understand our world through the digital images we see, like we're watching digital images right now, right? And how this digital seeing is becoming understood as lived experience. Like if you're watching like a live video on your phone or the computer, you're like, oh, I'm watching it live. But you're watching a video of it live, like you're not there. So just kind of just recognizing that it's still this digital mediation, these images we're getting information from versus there, and that separation that we're having. So the question that I'll kind of leave you with today is, what does it mean to gaze at digital representations of the world longer than you might watch the real one? So, thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your stunning work with us. I have a question. Antarctica is a very unique space, and I can imagine going there must be life-changing in a way. So I was wondering how going to Antarctica changed you as a person, and maybe even did it have any impact on the way you think about art?
Yeah, it's a good question. No, it was pretty amazing. I mean, there was definitely, in one sense, when I was going down, I wanted to be like this big, wide open, life-changing thing. But in some ways, it was really hectic because I'd be like photographing or filming from like 6 a.m. to like 11 p.m. because it was, the astral summer. But then there were times where like I'd be somewhere and be in the water and like the icebergs and the mountains with these little clouds that sat on them, and I like truly had like a full awe moment, and it was amazing. But the photographs from there, not so great. And so I think one of those things as an artist and as a person is like almost separating the experience from the image and learning that the good experiences might not have good photos and the good photos might just be of average experiences, but learning to kind of separate that and being okay with that. And I think just coming to terms with all of that. I think for me, just in general, going on location places, I just learned so much about it. And no, it was gorgeous. I don't know, I'm still, I guess it's been 2 years and I'm still like in it, so. Okay. Other questions?
How cold was it?
So, well, they kept telling us everything in Celsius. So
That's
like,
okay
so actually, like me and this other guy, we're like, what's the formula? And doing the math because like there's no internet and we have these things. So we're like, we got pretty close. I think like sometime. I mean, it was definitely, I don't know, in the negative teens. One day it got like around freezing, so we could like take off our jackets because we just had all of our other layers and going for a hike. But the leaders were like, it's nice for you guys, can take off your jackets, but like this isn't good. So like the high was like freezing. Where it was really cold was on the boat because you have the wind and the things and it's ice, and I'm like filming like this. Hiking on land wasn't a problem. It was on the boat was the coldest because all the wind. So I don't know. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
That was amazing. Your rising tide will be with me forever. I mean, it's really, really powerful. And thanks for showing the whole thing through. I noticed that aside from the penguins, which I think was you were doing for us because everybody loves penguins, most of your images are of inanimate. And as I was thinking about your traces of wind and water, my mind immediately went to traces to wind and pollinators. I think that there's a role of wind in sort of life, from bird migrations to pollinators being blown off flowers. And I'm just wondering if you've ever played with wind and life in any particular way, shape, or fashion.
Yeah, I haven't yet. Again, I have a lot of footage which I haven't used for things. And for example, I was able to use some of that when I made the piece, the film Haiku. But also in Southeast Asia, I spent time on an elephant preserve, and I love elephants. So like I have a lot of elephant footage, which I might not ever use, but I haven't really thought about specifically wind and animals. And it might be this kind of thing of, I feel like this is my current series, and I'll just kind of keep working through this, and who knows where I'll go. But yeah, no, I haven't kind of crossed over into the animal world yet. I'm still here. Yeah, great. Other questions? Comments? Yeah.
Hi. So, since you were a Tufts student, I was wondering what kind of experiences, classes, if you could speak a little bit more about that, just for us students, things that we could look at that led you to do the work that you do.
Yeah, so I was a graduate student, and I was a graduate student 2005 to 2008 through the museum school program with Tufts. At that time, museum school was separate from Tufts, though we had to apply to both and get into both. So I took more art classes than, well, yeah, studio classes than my art history classes. I didn't really take any specific environment classes, but for me, part of being a graduate student is really developing your own interests in your own things that you're doing. Actually, the bottom right-hand one that I didn't show was actually part of my thesis exhibit that was here at Tufts. It was called Season Skies, and there the horizon stayed steady, but the water would kind of come up. I think my main tip is just take stuff that you're interested in, like spread around or try new things, or if something seems like maybe interested, just go and try it out. I think part of it's just following your gut and experimenting and trusting and trying different stuff. I don't know. I think, I mean, at my school, there wasn't video installation classes. It just started making sense to make these experiential pieces, and I just kind of went with it. I don't know. But I'll tell you what I did do is finding out about opportunities. I applied for, so museum school had for graduate students at the time, I don't know about now, you could have a national traveling fellowship, and you could also have an international traveling fellowship. So my national one, I went to Fairbanks, Alaska, because that's as far as I could get with, the US. But I also applied for a Tufts research grant. So I got that too, because I was doing the Aurora Borealis, so I was able to get 2 little chunks of money to go. And as a student, it's like maybe like $500, but back then, like that was a lot. And then my international one, I went to Iceland. So about finding out about the various grants and programs and travel things, like that would be my big tip, like take advantage of those. I mean, this trip to Antarctica, it was also because I was an alum. Like, I just apply and apply and apply. Like, so, yeah. Great, other questions?
Wonderful talk. Thank you so
Thanks.
much for sharing your work and for amazing presentations. I wanted to ask, I was a big fan of the Ansel Adams in our Times exhibit last year at the MFA, and I took my environment communication and culture class and made them think about it.
Great.
And I wanted to ask, one of the things that exhibit did so well was to make us think about sort of the impacts of Ansel Adams' work and contemporary artists who are sort of thinking about the impacts of their work. So I wanted to ask you how, if you could reflect a tiny bit on the impacts of your work as you perceive them. Big questions, so you don't have to answer all.
Yeah, I would love to think that there's a big impact on my work. Also, before I finish answering, look over your left-hand shoulder to the man in the plaid shirt. That's James Layton. He helped work on that exhibit at the MFA, so you guys should chat afterwards. One of the things that I've strived for is making experiential works, and in my studio, I'll keep testing something until I feel something. One of the biggest impacts that I was told about personally was in my Eye of the Storm one, the original one, the big one. A woman came up to me at the opening and she was like, I just have to tell you, like, recently my brother died and my friend wanted me to go to this art opening. She's like, I don't want to go to this art opening. But she went, and then she came to me and she's like, at first she felt like hectic and felt really overwhelmed. And then she said by the end of it, she felt the sense of calm, and she felt like things will be okay. And I don't know if that was about her feelings, like knowing that her grief might pass, or maybe that her brother might be okay, or the whole cycle of life and things would be okay, but like she just had this moment, and like I could never set that out as a goal, but like that meant a lot to me.
Hi, I noticed that in your dual channel piece in Antarctica that there was no sound in that film, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the sounds you did hear in Antarctica and your choice not to include those.
Yeah, so there was a part of me, like in my proposal, I was like, I'm gonna film this and do this and like record audio and do all this and like ice cracking, but like I wasn't really around any ice that was cracking. On the boat, it's all boat noise. It's like, and giant things. The penguins are so loud. They're probably the main noise from Antarctica, and the seals, who are hilarious too. But no, I mean, I've heard like other people who've done some different residencies, like going to the Arctic Circle, have done some like the ice cracking stuff, and I would love to do that, but I haven't really heard it specifically in Iceland, which is not your question, but I was filming the small icebergs in a glacial lagoon where I was on the beach where I could be steady for a long time and it could be quiet, and then you hear a crack, and you knew something was about to like break, and only once was I like in the right place. Generally, it's like over there or somewhere. So like, so again, by being on site, like I started to learn the sounds that would happen. But in Antarctica, if I was on land, I was generally hiking around, and on the boat, it's boat. So penguins, they're really loud. But yeah, but the choice for audio and pieces, which is second to your question, is. Sometimes I want people just to pay attention to the visuals, and if there's audio or let's say music, you'd be like, oh, music and like icebergs. But if there's no audio, you just like actually have to watch the visuals. In the installations where I can have it more closed off, I love having really deep and interesting audioscapes to immerse people. But in a wide open space like the museum, audio gets lost really easily. So, in my outdoor pieces, I don't usually have audio either for the same reason. So. Great question.
I have one last question before we wrap up. And I know some of my students are interested in your personal path. So could you tell us a little bit about your personal journey and how also, do you have any tips to turn art from a passion to a way of living?
Yes, and sure. How far do you want me to go back, like where I grew up or whatever?
Whatever you want to tell us.
I moved around a lot as a kid. It's being recorded. Anyway, North Carolina, Connecticut, Ohio, and then I did middle school and high school out in Portland, Oregon, and then I went to UC Santa Cruz. So like, it's a college in the middle of the redwood forest, and it's really beautiful. And like, it's a like busy little art student, and you'd be like going from class, and you'd be like, ocean, and then you're like busy again. And sometimes you would see the school mascot, which is the banana slug, like smushed on the sidewalk, and kind of sad. But it was funny when I was in Santa Cruz, because it was so beautiful, all I wanted was like gritty San Francisco. And I think it's sometimes like this, like wherever I am, I kind of want the other element. And then growing up in Portland, Oregon is a kind of a nice little mix of things. But after that, I went down to New Orleans for a number of years and was working in a photography gallery and doing other things. And then I went to New York. But I spent a long time helping other people's careers, like musicians and working in galleries. And I was like, as far as I know, I only have this one life. And I was like, you know what? Like, I want to work on my own career. And that's when I decided to go to grad school. So I actually took about 9 years between undergrad and grad school. Because, finally I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. Also at that time, museum school had it was a 3-year program, 2 years of classes, and then another year to work on your thesis. And that was really the big difference for me. And that's because I had a year to develop this idea of the experimental pieces and testing and doing all this stuff and filming. And now they don't have that anymore, which I think is a little too bad for them, but also just having that time to really go deep. And I just work a lot and I test a lot. I make drawings, I make models, scale models, and then I'll make life-size test models. Like the sculptures were cardboard first. Actually, the museum let me test them in their space, and then I go forward. So I do a lot of planning. So being organized helps, and planning and talking to people. Yeah, I don't know if that was specific enough.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, thanks.